A deserted back road stretching into nowhere, 2 corrupt police officers, drunk on impunity, and an indigenous man they intend to erase, burying him beneath the unforgiving Outback soil, confident their secret will die with him. But they've made a fatal miscalculation. The man they're trying to bury isn't just an outsider who stumbled into their rotten kingdom. He's Superintendent Ethan Rowe, the very force sent by the state to dismantle the empire of fear they've meticulously built. What begins as a brutal act of racist violence ignites a war, a desperate battle for survival, truth, and the soul of Ironbark Shire. The ground here is soaked in secrets, but the storm is coming to wash them clean. Before we descend into the heart of this corrupt shire and witness Ethan's fight for survival and justice, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss the shocking turns ahead. Ethan Rowe felt the weight of Ironbark Shire long before he crossed its official border. It pressed in through the windows of his old Holden ute, heavy and hostile, carried on the dust kicked up from the cracked bitumen. Rugged ranges clawed at the distant Ni-Sao-Bao horizon, stark silhouettes against a too-bright sky. Less a landscape, more a warning. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Everyone had warned him. The Premier's liaison, the federal police who'd briefed him. Ironbark wasn't just remote, it was resistant. A pocket of the past where power, clutched tightly by a handful of men, actively repelled change, especially change that arrived in the form of an indigenous man wearing a superintendent's insignia. He felt the simple, unadorned insignia inside his jacket, a physical reminder of the responsibility, the danger, the war he was willingly stepping into. Up ahead, blocking the 2-lane road, sat a pair of Shire police cars, parked diagonally, lights dark, an unambiguous message. Turn back. Ethan slowed the ute, pulling to a stop a respectful distance away. Silence descended, broken only by his engine's low hum and the whisper of hot wind across the saltbush scrub. 2 officers emerged. One was a wall of a man, built solid, face set in a permanent scowl behind mirrored sunglasses that reflected only sky and contempt. Sergeant Granger. The other was leaner, wiry, coiled energy radiating from him, a crooked smile playing on his lips that promised trouble. Constable Roach. Ethan cut the engine, stepping out slowly, deliberately, onto the scorching pavement. His boots crunched on gravel. He stood tall, letting the dust swirl around him, saying nothing, waiting. Granger ambled forward, projecting effortless dominance, his hand resting near his belt. Lost. Are we, mate? His voice was a low drawl, thick with disdain. Ethan met the mirrored gaze evenly. No, Sergeant. Heading into town. Business at the station. Roach let out a short, barking laugh. Business, eh? Selling something or just looking for trouble? Ethan didn't react to the jibe. He pulled his jacket open just enough for the insignia inside to glint in the harsh sunlight. Name's Rowe, he stated calmly. Superintendent Rowe. A beat of silence. Confusion flickered between the 2 officers, quickly replaced by disbelief, then open hostility. Granger's mouth twisted. You? Superintendent? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Now that's bloody rich. Roach began circling Ethan's ute, peering inside with predatory curiosity. Must be some kind of mistake, Roach called out, loud enough for Ethan to hear clearly. No way they sent some city bloke out here to run Ironbark. Granger stepped closer, invading Ethan's personal space, his shadow falling over him. See, Superintendent, he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, menacing tone. We got ways around here, ways you wouldn't understand. Best thing for you is to turn this old ute around and just keep on driving. Ethan stood his ground, unblinking. I was appointed to serve this shire, he replied quietly. All of it. Roach tapped the ute's tray with his knuckles. And what if the shire don't want serving by your kind, Superintendent? The sarcasm was thick, ugly. Granger's smile sharpened. You think that shiny rank means something out here? Think a few fancy words change anything? You don't know this place, son, and it sure as hell don't want to know you. The air crackled, the Outback seeming to hold its breath. Ethan could feel the confrontation coiling tighter, ready to strike. I'm not here to ask permission, he said finally, his voice still calm, but underscored with steel. I'm here to enforce the law, Roach scoffed loudly. Law's what we say it is out here. Granger nodded slowly, as if confirming a decision already made. He leaned in, his breath hot, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes. You're making a real big mistake, Rowe, he whispered. And around here, mistakes don't get a second chance. For a long, charged moment, they remained locked in the standoff. 3 men, dust, heat, and a hatred as old as the landscape itself. Finally, Granger stepped back, spitting contemptuously into the dirt between them. "Get moving," he growled. "Road's clear. For now." Ethan gave a single, curt nod. He climbed back into the ute, started the engine, and rolled forward slowly, forcing the 2 officers to step aside. In his rearview mirror, he saw them watching him go, their faces tight masks of anger, but underneath, he sensed something else. A flicker of fear. The fear of the unknown. The fear of change. The fear of a man who didn't play by their corrupted rules. Ethan drove towards the town of Ironbark, the squat police station building shimmering like a malevolent mirage in the distance. He gripped the wheel, the insignia pressing against his chest, a constant reminder. He wasn't here to be liked. He was here for justice. And Ironbark Shire was about to get a long overdue lesson in what that truly meant. Ethan hadn't traveled 5 kilometers down the desolate Shire road before the familiar headlights reappeared, burning hotly in his rearview mirror. The marked police car hugged his tailgate, riding dangerously close, a clear act of intimidation. No lights, no siren, just silent, aggressive pressure. Ethan sighed inwardly. Round 2. He pulled the ute onto the dusty shoulder, movement slow, hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. The police car skidded to a halt behind him, kicking up a cloud of fine red dust. Doors slammed. Boots crunched on the gravel. He rolled his window down halfway. Granger materialized first, his face flushed, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes, but not the contempt radiating from him. Roach followed, that unsettling, crooked grin fixed in place. "License and registration," Granger barked, rapping his knuckles sharply against the window. Ethan complied wordlessly, retrieving the documents and passing them out. Granger barely glanced at them before crumpling the papers slightly and tossing them onto Ethan's dashboard. "Any idea why we pulled you over, Superintendent?" The title was pure mockery now. "No, Sergeant," Ethan replied evenly. "I wasn't aware I'd committed any infraction." Roach chuckled softly, leaning down to peer into the cab. "Failed to indicate back at that turnoff," Granger stated flatly, the lie blatant. There had been no turnoff. Could have caused a collision. Gonna have to check the vehicle. Standard procedure. Ethan knew arguing was futile, dangerous even, out here alone. "Go ahead," he said, his voice tight but steady. That was all the invitation they needed. Roach yanked open the passenger door and began tearing through Ethan's belongings with vicious enthusiasm. Papers flew. The contents of a duffel bag were dumped unceremoniously onto the floor mats. Ethan sat perfectly still, jaw clenched, watching the violation, knowing this was performative, designed to humiliate and provoke. Suddenly, Roach paused. "Well, looky here," he drawled, holding up a small plastic snap-lock bag containing a suspicious white powder. His grin stretched wider, uglier. Ethan's stomach plummeted, planted. Obvious, clumsy, but lethally effective out here. "Well, well," Granger purred, stepping closer. "Possession of a controlled substance, looks like, Superintendent." Ethan met his unseen eyes behind the mirrored lenses. "That's not mine, and you know it." Granger leaned down, invading the cab's space. "Doesn't matter whose it was, does it?" he whispered conspiratorially. "Only matters what the report says it is." Roach laughed, tossing the planted bag onto the passenger seat like a trophy. "You people think you can just waltz in here, take over," Roach sneered. "Out here, we make the rules." Ethan remained silent, his mind working furiously, assessing the rapidly deteriorating situation. Arguing was pointless. Resisting physically was suicide. "Step out of the vehicle," Granger ordered, his hand now resting on his holstered sidearm. Ethan obeyed, moving with deliberate slowness, stepping out into the oppressive heat, hands kept visible. Instantly, Granger grabbed his arm, twisting it painfully behind his back, slamming Ethan's face against the hot metal flank of the ute. "Resisting," Granger sneered, the accusation absurd. "Careful now, Superintendent. Wouldn't want to add assaulting police to your growing list." Ethan gritted his teeth against the searing pain of the sun-baked metal against his cheek, saying nothing. He felt Roach move behind him. The atmosphere shifted again, growing heavier, darker. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was escalating towards something final. Granger performed a rough, perfunctory pat-down. "You're under arrest," he announced. "Possession with intent." "You're making a mistake," Ethan stated again, his voice quiet but firm. Granger smiled at his low, chilling expression. "No, Superintendent. You made the mistake. Come in here," thinking that rank meant anything. Roach produced plastic zip ties, cinching them brutally tight around Ethan's wrists behind his back. No caution read, no procedure followed. This wasn't an arrest. It was an abduction disguised in uniform. Granger shoved him, not towards the police car, but away from the road, towards the open scrub, the dry wash littered with sun-bleached kangaroo bones and spinifex. "Where are we going?" Ethan demanded, stumbling but keeping his feet. "You'll see," Roach replied with that chilling grin. They marched him into the desolate landscape, away from any possibility of witnesses, any chance of rescue. Granger stopped near a patch of softer red earth. He kicked at the ground, then tossed a rusted shovel towards Ethan. "Start digging." Ethan stared at the shovel, then at the two officers, the horrifying implications settling cold and heavy in his gut. "You serious?" "Dig," Granger repeated flatly, "or we dig it for you. And trust me, you don't want that." After a heartbeat of disbelief, Ethan knelt awkwardly, the zip ties digging mercilessly into his wrists, and began scraping at the hard-packed earth with the shovel's edge. Above him, Granger and Roach leaned against their cruiser, which they'd pulled off the road, laughing, trading crude jokes, utterly casual as they watched him excavate his own grave. Every movement was agony. Every scrape of metal on sand, a countdown. They didn't intend for him to see the inside of the Ironbark Shire lockup. They intended for him to disappear forever into the unforgiving Outback. Dust, sweat, pain, they blurred together. But Ethan kept digging, his mind racing faster than his failing body. He was buying time, observing, searching for any weakness, any chance. He hadn't come this far, endured so much, only to end up as another forgotten victim of Ironbark Shire's brutal brand of justice. He wouldn't die here, not without a fight, not before he fulfilled his purpose. The Outback sun beat down relentlessly as Ethan dug, the shovel biting feebly into the baked earth. His wrists were raw, bleeding where the zip ties cut deep. Red dust clogged his throat, sweat burned his eyes, but the physical agony was secondary to the cold dread tightening around his chest. Granger and Roach watched from the minimal shade of their police car, their amusement feeding off his struggle. This wasn't just about eliminating him, it was about savoring his degradation. "You know," Roach called out, his voice lazy with cruelty, "this hole ain't just for you, Superintendent. It's a message for anyone else thinking they can mess with how things are run around here." Ethan ignored him, focusing his dwindling energy on the task, on stalling, on hoping against hope for an interruption, an escape. An hour, maybe more, crawled by under the oppressive heat. The hole deepened slowly, painfully. Finally, Granger strolled over, surveying Ethan's labored progress. "That'll do," he announced casually. "Get in." Ethan paused, looking down into the shallow, sandy pit, his own grave. The dark earth at the bottom seemed to beckon him towards oblivion. Roach stepped closer, his hand pointedly resting on the butt of his pistol. "Move it," he barked. With immense effort, Ethan lowered himself into the hole, his bound hands making balance precarious. The sand shifted around his boots. He stood there, chest heaving, trapped, looking up at the two men silhouetted against the blinding sky. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice raspy but steady. Granger let out that quiet, ugly laugh again. "Yeah, Superintendent," he replied softly. "Afraid we do." Then the dirt began to fall. The first shovel load struck Ethan's chest with a heavy thud, stealing his breath. Cold, despite the searing heat. He flinched but held his ground, refusing them the satisfaction of his fear. More dirt rained down. Sand, rocks, dry soil, piling up around his legs, then his knees, then his hips. Granger and Roach worked with a grim, practiced efficiency. Their movements quick, silent now, focused on the task of erasure. The weight built steadily, pinning his legs, making it impossible to shift. Sand climbed his torso, compressing his ribs, restricting his breath. He fought for each shallow inhalation, his training kicking in. Conserve air, stay calm, focus. The world narrowed to the suffocating pressure and the shrinking patch of pale blue sky above. Roach leaned over the edge, peering down, his grin feral. "How's it feel down there, Superintendent?" he taunted. "Still feeling large and in charge?" Ethan didn't waste breath responding. Granger crouched beside the hole, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting Ethan's dirt-streaked, barely recognizable face. "Thought you could change things, Rowe," Granger whispered. his tone almost conversational, yet dripping with malice. "Just another outsider who didn't learn the rules." He stood and tossed another heavy shovelful onto Ethan's chest. The weight became crushing. Breathing was a desperate struggle now. His vision swam. His body screamed for release, for the darkness. But a deeper instinct, a stubborn fire, refused to be extinguished. He thought of the people of Ironbark, trapped in their own kind of grave, buried under years of fear. He thought of his oath. He thought of survival. He began to work his shoulders infinitesimally against the compacting earth, testing, planning. Granger and Roach finished their work, wiping sweaty hands on their uniform pants. "Leave him," Granger grunted. "Dingos'll clean up." Roach chuckled, kicking a final clump of dirt into the hole. "Sweet dreams, Superintendent." The crunch of their boots faded. Car doors slammed. An engine roared to life, the vibrations traveling through the ground. Then, silence. Profound, absolute Outback silence, broken only by Ethan's own ragged, desperate breaths. He tilted his head back, straining for air, for a view beyond the lip of the grave. He couldn't move his limbs. The dirt held him fast. Panic threatened to engulf him, but he fought it back. He had faced death before, during overseas service, under fire, amidst wreckage. He hadn't surrendered then. He wouldn't now. With agonizing slowness, he renewed the minuscule movements, shifting his shoulders, trying to create the smallest pocket of space. Wiggle, push, breathe. Wiggle, push, breathe. The plastic zip ties bit deeper, scraping skin raw. Muscles screamed. Time lost all meaning. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised oranges and purples. The temperature began to drop, a marginal relief. And then, a sound. Faint at first, distant, irregular, tires crunching slowly on gravel. An old engine sputtering slightly. Hope, fragile and unexpected, flickered within him. He tried to shout, but only a strangled gasp escaped. The sound drew closer, then stopped. Silence again, stretching his nerves taut. Then, a car door creaked open. Hesitant footsteps approached. A beam from a torch swept across the disturbed earth, the tracks, then landed on the sliver of Ethan's face visible above the sand. "Bloody hell," a rough, older voice breathed out. Hope surged. The light dropped as the figure rushed towards the grave. "Hold on, mate, hold on." Rough, calloused hands began digging frantically, clawing at the packed dirt. "Name's Hank," the man grunted between breaths, working with desperate urgency. "Harry Lawson. Just hang in there." The shovel reappeared, digging carefully but quickly around Ethan's trapped body. Finally, with a heave and a gasp, Hank freed Ethan's shoulders, grabbed him under the arms, and hauled him from the grave. Ethan collapsed onto the hard ground, shuddering violently, gasping for air, his body convulsing with cramps. Hank knelt beside him, offering small sips of water from an old flask. "Easy now." "Small sips." Ethan choked, then managed to swallow. Stars wheeled overhead. The Outback spun. But he was alive. Alive. Who are you?" Ethan finally rasped. "Hank Lawson. Just an old bloke drives these back roads," Hank replied gruffly. "Superintendent Rowe," Ethan managed. Hank's weathered face registered surprise, then grim understanding. "Superintendent, eh? Figured you riled 'em up good. Burying a superintendent? They've lost their bloody minds." He scanned the darkness. "Can't stay here. They find you gone, they'll be back." Ethan tried to stand, his legs buckling. Hank caught him. "Gotcha." With surprising strength, Hank helped Ethan into his battered ute. As they bumped along the dark, rutted track, away from the shallow grave, Hank spoke again. "Know a place. Safe for tonight." Ethan closed his eyes, exhaustion finally claiming him, but his mind remained fiercely awake. They hadn't buried him. They had only planted the seeds of a reckoning. Harry Hank, Lawson's farmhouse materialized out of the pre-dawn darkness, a solitary porch light cutting a weak yellow swath against the vast, indifferent landscape. The old ute groaned to a stop. "All right, Superintendent," Hank said gently. "Let's get you inside." Ethan, moving stiffly, every muscle protesting, allowed Hank to help him up the worn wooden steps and into the house. It smelled of wood smoke, old dust, and a lifetime of quiet endurance. Hank settled him onto a faded floral couch near a cold fireplace, draping a thick, patched wool blanket over his shoulders. "Sit tight," Hank instructed. "Water first. Then we figure out the what now." Ethan nodded, accepting the offered glass, the cool liquid soothing his raw throat. While Hank moved around the small kitchen, Ethan took stock of his surroundings, his senses slowly returning. He also took stock of himself. He was battered, bruised, violated, but unbroken. The fire Hank lit in the hearth crackled to life, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Hank returned with 2 steaming mugs of strong tea, pulling up a rickety wooden chair opposite the couch. They sat in silence for a long time, the shared trauma and the unspoken understanding hanging between them. Finally, Hank broke the quiet. "Figured you were trouble soon as I saw you out there," he began, his voice gravelly. Ethan managed a wry, painful smile. "Trouble seems to be my line of work lately." Hank nodded slowly. "They didn't just try to bury you 'cause you're an outsider, Superintendent, or 'cause of your skin, though that's part of it, sure. They tried to bury you 'cause they're scared, terrified." Ethan leaned forward slightly. His interest piqued despite the pain. "Scared of what?" Hank took a long sip of tea. "Scared of you finding out what they really run here. Ironbark ain't just a shire. It's a private kingdom built on fear and greed." He proceeded to lay bare the shire's dark underbelly, decades in the making. It started small, local cops skimming drug busts, shaking down businesses. Then it grew, questionable land deals facilitated by compliant counselors, safety violations used to crush competitors, magistrates looking to the other way, the local council lining pockets. "They got their hooks in deep," Hank explained, his voice laced with bitterness. "Soon enough, folks learned to keep quiet if they wanted to keep what little they had." "Didn't anyone fight back?" Ethan asked. Hank's expression clouded. "Some tried. My own brother, Liam, he was a constable, younger than me, full of ideals. Tried to expose the extortion racket back in the 90s. Found him out on his property a week later. Single vehicle accident, they called it." He stared into the fire. "Everyone knew. Nobody spoke up. After that, well, you learn to just survive. Batten down the hatches and pray the storm passes you by." Ethan felt a profound weight settle in his chest, the weight of accumulated silence, of fear passed down like an inheritance. "So Granger, Roach, they're just the muscle?" Hank snorted. "Muscle, yeah. Loyal dogs. But the real rot goes higher. Council head, Ray Cutler. Maybe even Superintendent Brody, the bloke they pushed out to retire when you got appointed. Hard to say how far the roots spread." He looked directly at Ethan. "They thought you were just another appointment they could scare off or buy out when you didn't fold at the roadblock, when you didn't break when they arrested you. They panicked. Decided burying you was easier." Ethan processed this, the pieces clicking into place. His appointment wasn't just a job, it was a direct threat to their entire corrupt enterprise. "And you, Hank?" Ethan asked quietly. "Why risk helping me now?" Hank stared into his mug for a long moment. "Maybe 'cause I'm old and tired of being scared," he finally admitted. "Maybe 'cause seeing what they did to you reminded me of Liam. Maybe 'cause for the first time in 30 years, it feels like there's a chance, a real chance, to burn the whole damn thing down." He met Ethan's gaze, a flicker of the old fire returning to his eyes. "But you need proof, Superintendent. Hard proof. Stories ain't enough in court, especially not here." He stood abruptly and walked to a battered chest in the corner, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick, dusty manila folder. "Found this after Liam passed," Hank said, his voice thick. "His notes, copies of reports he shouldn't have had, bank slips, photos, never knew what to do with it. Till now." He dropped the folder onto the table in front of Ethan. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a treasure trove. Fragmented evidence, yes, but a clear map of conspiracy. Names, dates, transactions, hushed complaints that never saw the light of day. It corroborated everything Hank had said, and hinted at even more. It was the beginning. "Thank you, Hank," Ethan said, the words inadequate, but heartfelt. "Don't thank me yet," Hank replied gruffly, pouring more tea. "Getting this out there, proving it, that's the hard part. They ain't gonna sit quiet while you dismantle their kingdom." Ethan closed the folder, the weight of it immense. "No," he agreed, looking towards the window where the first hints of dawn were painting the bruised sky. "They won't sit quiet, but neither will we. It's just getting started." The farmhouse, once a symbol of Hank's quiet resignation, had become the unlikely headquarters for a revolution. And as the sun rose over Ironbark Shire, the men who thought they had silenced Ethan Rowe were about to discover just how badly they had miscalculated. The oppressive midday heat settled over Ironbark Shire, but inside Hank's farmhouse, a different kind of heat was building, the intensity of purpose. Ethan, fortified by strong tea and Hank's simple but sustaining breakfast, pored over the contents of the weathered manila folder. It was a mosaic of past sins, copies of suspiciously altered police reports, anonymous letters detailing extortion demands, grainy photographs showing police officers meeting with known local criminals, bank receipts hinting at unexplained cash flows. Each document was a breadcrumb leading down a dark path. Hank hovered nearby, adding context, filling in gaps. Ray Cutler. Hank pointed to a name on a list of council tender approvals linked to a questionable development project. Council president. Smooth operator, greased palms for years, helped kill inquiries, made sure the right magistrates got assigned to sensitive cases. He tapped another name. Superintendent Brody, the bloke before you? He wasn't dirty himself, not hands-on, but he looked the other way. Let Granger and his crew run rampant as long as things stayed out of the city papers. Ethan absorbed it all, connecting dots, formulating a strategy. This is strong, Ethan admitted, but it's mostly historical, circumstantial in places. We need something current, something undeniable, something that links Granger and Roach directly to ongoing criminal activity, maybe Cutler too. Hank leaned back, stroking his grizzled beard. Folks are scared, Superintendent. Been scared for generations. Getting someone to talk on record about current stuff, that's like asking them to paint a target on their own back. Then we don't ask them to sign anything yet, Ethan countered. We ask them to listen. We show them someone is finally fighting back. Fear keeps them silent, Hank. Maybe hope can make them speak. That afternoon, they drove Hank's dusty ute into the outskirts of Ironbark town, deliberately avoiding the main roads, the police station. They started knocking on doors, not with authority, but with quiet persistence. Ethan, bruised but resolute. Hank, a familiar, weathered face vouching for him. The reception was mixed. Doors slammed shut. Curtains twitched, eyes peering out fearfully before retreating. Whispered warnings to leave it be. But then, small cracks appeared. An elderly woman, Mrs. Nguyen, whose son's farm mysteriously faced foreclosure after he complained about water access being diverted to a property linked to Cutler, finally broke her silence, tears streaming down her face as she recounted the veiled threats that kept her quiet for years. Trent, a young mechanic whose workshop faced constant, crippling compliance inspections after he refused to offer mates rates repairs to certain officers, shared his story, his voice trembling but defiant. Megan, a barmaid at the local pub, spoke of hearing Granger and Roach bragging about owning this shire and making blow-ins pay. Each conversation was a risk. For Ethan, for Hank, but especially for the residents. Yet with each shared story, a fragile network of trust began to form. They weren't alone in their fear. And now perhaps they weren't alone in their fight. By sunset, they retreated back to the relative safety of the dirt roads leading to Hank's farm. The folder now thicker, heavier with fresh testimonies. Names, potential leads. It's building, Ethan said, exhaustion evident but overshadowed by determination. We need one more piece, something concrete connecting the current cops to the big fish, Cutler, maybe even Brody's negligence. Hank drove in silence for a moment, then pulled over near an overgrown track. There's one place, he said hesitantly. Risky, real risky. Old abandoned meatworks out near Devil's Elbow. Used to hear stories, cops meeting folks out there late at night. No witnesses out there. Ethan looked at him. Let's go. As dusk bled into true night, they approached the derelict meatworks, parking Hank's ute a distance away and moving on foot through the dry grass and thorny bushes. The building loomed, skeletal against the starry sky, corrugated iron rusted and peeling. A single vehicle, a nondescript sedan, was parked near a side entrance. Voices murmured from inside. Ethan and Hank crept closer, using the shadows and crumbling outbuildings for cover. Peering through a grimy window, Ethan saw them, Granger, Roach, and Counselor Ray Cutler. Cutler was handing Granger a thick envelope. Roach stood watch, scanning the darkness nervously. The conversation was muffled, but key phrases drifted out. Consignment clear. Payment as agreed. Keep the feds off our backs. Rowe problem dealt with soon. It was the smoking gun. Corruption in plain sight. Ethan subtly raised his phone, heart pounding, recording the exchange through the dirty glass. Just as Cutler turned to leave, Roach stiffened, his head snapping towards the window where Ethan and Hank were hidden. "What was that?" Roach hissed, hand going to his weapon. Granger and Cutler froze, Ethan pulled Hank back instantly, melting into the deeper shadows. They heard boots crunching outside, beams from torches cutting through the darkness, searching. "Just a ruse," Granger grunted after a tense minute, clearly wanting the meeting over. "Let's go." The sedan pulled away, followed shortly by the police 4WD. Ethan and Hank waited, hidden, until the taillights disappeared completely, leaving them alone with the silent, rusting meatworks and the damning recording on Ethan's phone. They had it, the proof, but as they made their way back to Hank's ute, the air felt colder, heavier. They had wounded the beast. Now it would be desperate. Back at the farmhouse, exhilaration warred with unease. Ethan immediately began uploading the recording, sending encrypted copies to his AFP contacts and storing backups. Just as the file transfer completed, a flicker of motion outside the window caught Hank's eye. Headlights, moving fast up their long dirt driveway. No attempt at stealth. "They know," Hank breathed, grabbing an old shotgun from above the fireplace. "Or they suspect enough." Ethan grabbed the evidence folder. "Back door! Now!" Glass shattered behind them as they burst out into the yard. The smell of accelerant hit them first, sharp and chemical. Flames erupted from the front porch, spreading with terrifying speed, consuming the dry old timber. "The ute!" Ethan yelled, sprinting towards the pickup hidden near the boundary fence. Hank was right behind him. They scrambled inside just as another Molotov cocktail hit the side of the machinery shed, igniting the dry grass stored within. The whole property was going up in flames. Ethan slammed the ute into gear, tires spinning in the loose dirt, fishtailing onto the back track as the farmhouse roared behind them, a funeral pyre for Hank's past. They didn't look back. The orange glow illuminated the rearview mirror, a stark reminder of the price of truth in Ironbark Shire. They drove for hours, taking winding back roads Hank knew, like the lines on his hand, finally pulling into another hidden spot, an abandoned shearer's quarters deep in the hills. They were exposed, homeless, hunted, but they had the evidence. They had the truth, and they had each other. "They think burning your home stops this?" Ethan said, his voice low, raw with fury as he clutched the evidence folder. Hank stared into the darkness, the reflection of distant flames still seeming to dance in his eyes. "Nope," he rasped. "They just made damn sure we finish it." The Outback night closed in around them, silent and vast, waiting for the final act. Dawn broke over Ironbark Shire, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but the beauty felt mocking, overlaid with the tension of an impending storm. Ethan Rowe and Hank Lawson emerged from the cramped shearer's quarters, stiff, smoke-stained, but resolute. The ashes of Hank's farmhouse were miles behind them, but the fire of righteous anger burned hotter than ever. They had the evidence, the recording, the testimonies. Now, it was time to bring the fight into the open. "They expect us to run, to hide," Ethan said, looking towards the distant town. "We're going to walk right into the heart of it." Hank nodded grimly. "Town square? Midday? Make it public." "Exactly," Ethan confirmed. "No more hiding. We bring the truth to the people. Let them see it, hear it." They spent the morning coordinating. Ethan used a burner phone Hank had stashed to contact Detective Inspector Cole, his AFP handler, briefing him on the recording, the arson, and the plan for a public reveal. Cole confirmed federal backup was mobilizing, ready to move on Ethan's signal. Hank reached out to the few trusted contacts they had made, Mrs. Nguyen, Trent, Megan the barmaid, spreading the word, "Town square, noon. The superintendent is making his stand." Word spread like wildfire through the fearful but watchful community. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into tentative plans. By 11:30 a.m., as Ethan and Hank drove towards the center of Ironbark Town in Hank's ute, people began to emerge from their homes, their shops. They gathered hesitantly at first, lining the edges of the dusty town square, eyes watchful, uncertain. The air crackled with anticipation. Ethan and Hank parked, grabbing the evidence folder and the small, portable speaker Hank had salvaged. As they walked towards the dilapidated Shire Hall steps, the crowd parted slightly, a mixture of fear and curiosity in their eyes. Maybe 30 people, then 50, then more, drawn by the unfolding drama. Hank quickly set up the speaker and microphone. Ethan took a deep breath, adjusted the simple insignia inside his jacket, a reminder of the authority they tried to bury, and stepped forward. "My name is Ethan Rowe," his voice echoed across the now silent square, amplified just enough. "You know why I came here. You know what they tried to do to me." Heads nodded. Eyes stayed fixed on him. They tried to silence me because I wouldn't play their game. They tried to bury me because they were afraid of the truth." He held up the thick manila folder. "But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. This," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "is the proof. Proof of the corruption, the extortion, the intimidation that has choked this shire for decades." He placed the folder on the makeshift podium. "Proof that the men sworn to protect you have been preying on you." Just as he spoke, two figures pushed through the crowd from the direction of the police station. Granger and Roach, uniformed, arrogant, moving with the swagger of men who still believed they were untouchable. "Big talk, Rowe," Granger shouted, his voice dripping with menace. "Think these folks are going to save you now?" Roach smirked beside him, hand hovering near his sidearm. The crowd flinched, some taking a step back. Ethan faced them directly, unflinching. "I don't need saving, Granger. I have the truth." Granger laughed that harsh, ugly sound. "Truth means nothing here. Power's all that matters, and you ain't got it." Ethan stepped down from the steps, meeting them halfway on the dusty ground. "You're right," he conceded calmly. "Alone, I don't." He turned, his gaze sweeping across the gathered residents. "But we do." A subtle shift rippled through the crowd. Hank stepped up silently beside Ethan. Mrs. Nguyen emerged from the front row, followed by Trent, then others. Faces etched with fear, yes, but also a dawning courage. Granger's smirk wavered. "A bunch of scared farmers and shopkeepers?" Roach sneered, though his eyes darted nervously now. "No," Ethan's voice turned to ice. "But what's coming next should worry you." On cue, a black 4WD pulled swiftly into the square, blocking the street. Two men in dark suits and sunglasses emerged, flashing AFP identification. Detective Inspector Cole and his partner moved with quiet, federal authority towards the deputies. Simultaneously, other unmarked federal vehicles began appearing at the square's entry points, their presence unmistakable. Cole addressed the crowd, his voice clear and authoritative. "My name is Detective Inspector Cole, Australian Federal Police. We are conducting a joint federal and state investigation into public corruption in Ironbark Shire." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Granger's face went slack with disbelief, then contorted with rage. Roach's hand instinctively went to his weapon. Ethan saw the move. Before Roach could draw, Ethan surged forward, deflecting the constable's arm and shoving him hard, sending him stumbling back. Granger reached for his own gun, but Hank, surprisingly quick, tackled the larger man around the knees, bringing him crashing down in a cloud of dust. Chaos erupted. Shouts, screams. The federal agents moved instantly, weapons drawn, securing Granger and Roach, cuffing them swiftly and efficiently on the ground. It was over in seconds. When the dust began to settle, Granger and Roach lay face down on the pavement, defeated and furious. Ethan stood over them, breathing heavily, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a deep ache. "You lost," he stated quietly. Granger twisted his head, spitting dirt and hatred. "This town will eat you alive. It'll never change." Ethan shook his head slowly. "It already has." He looked around. The people of Ironbark were standing taller, their fear replaced by a stunned silence, then a growing murmur of realization. Inspector Cole approached Ethan. "We have warrants for 23 individuals based on your evidence and preliminary findings. Arrests are commencing now." Ethan nodded, handing Cole the evidence folder. "It's all in there. The recording from last night, too." He looked back at the crowd, his voice ringing out again. "I told you I wasn't just your superintendent. I'm Ethan Rowe, working under joint agency authority to dismantle this network." Another wave of shock, then understanding, washed over the faces. "You deserve leaders who serve you, not exploit you," Ethan declared. "This shire belongs to you again." A long silence, then a single voice cried out, "Thank you." Then another, and another. A hesitant, then growing wave of applause filled the square. It wasn't triumphant. It was cathartic, a release of decades of pent-up fear and frustration. Hank Lawson stood beside Ethan, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "Told you," Hank murmured. "Sometimes you gotta burn it all down to let the light in." Ethan watched the federal agents lead Granger and Roach away. He saw the faces in the crowd, faces finally daring to hope. The grave they dug couldn't hold him. The fire they set couldn't stop him. The storm had arrived, and Ironbark Shire was finally, painfully, beginning to wash itself clean. The Ironbark Shire Courthouse, a building that had long symbolized fear and compromised justice, had never witnessed anything like the trial of Sergeant Granger and Constable Roach, and the subsequent proceedings against the network they served. The courtroom was packed daily. Residents who had once feared even whispering complaints now filled the old wooden benches, their presence a quiet but powerful testament to the shift occurring. They came to watch, to bear witness, to ensure the truth, once unearthed, would not be buried again. Ethan Rowe, though the primary target and key witness, often sat amongst them, not in uniform, but as a member of the community he was fighting for. Granger and Roach, stripped of their badges and bravado, sat pale and tight-lipped at the defense table, their lawyers mounting increasingly desperate defenses against the mountain of evidence. Witness after witness took the stand. Mrs. Nguyen, voice trembling but clear, recounted the threats against her family after her son's farm foreclosure. Trent, the young mechanic, detailed the extortion through bogus compliance checks. Megan, the barmaid, repeated the boasts she'd overheard about running the Shire. Hank Lawson, steady and unflinching, laid out the decades of corruption he had observed, culminating in his discovery of Ethan in the Outback grave. His testimony, combined with the recovered notes from his brother Liam, painted a devastating picture of systemic abuse. The recordings Ethan had captured at the abandoned meatworks, the financial records linking Cutler and others to illegal payoffs, the testimonies of other officers who finally broke their silence under federal pressure. The evidence was irrefutable. Detective Inspector Cole presented the Joint Task Force findings, connecting the local corruption to wider networks, hinting at investigations that were still ongoing. When Ethan himself testified, recounting the roadside stop, the planted drugs, the forced digging, the horror of being buried alive, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. He spoke calmly, factually, but the underlying trauma, the sheer will to survive, resonated deeply. He concluded not with anger, but with a quiet statement of principle. They did this because they believed power gave them the right to decide who lived, who died, who mattered. They were wrong. True authority comes not from a badge or a gun, but from the consent of the governed and the faithful execution of the law for all people. The jury's deliberation was short. Guilty on all major counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, misconduct in public office, perverting the course of justice. As the verdicts were read, Granger slumped, utterly defeated. Roach stared blankly ahead, disconnected. But across the courtroom, a quiet catharsis unfolded. Tears flowed freely, not just of relief, but of validation. People hugged, clasped hands, a shared acknowledgement of a burden finally lifted. The subsequent trials and plea deals involving Counselor Cutler, the retired Superintendent Brody, and others implicated by the investigation continued the process of cleaning house. Ironbark Shire was undergoing a painful but necessary purging. Outside the courthouse, after the final verdict against Granger and Roach, the community gathered once more. This time, it wasn't a protest, but a quiet celebration of resilience. Hank stood beside Ethan, sipping coffee from a thermos. "Never thought I'd see the day," Hank admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan nodded, watching families share food, children chase each other on the courthouse lawn, small acts of normalcy reclaiming a space once defined by fear. "It's just the beginning, Hank," Ethan reminded him gently. "Rebuilding takes longer than tearing down." Hank clapped him on the shoulder. "Yeah, but we started. That's what matters." Ethan remained in Ironbark. His initial investigative role transitioned into overseeing the rebuilding of the local police service, working with newly appointed, vetted leadership and implementing community-focused policing reforms. He hired new officers, focusing on integrity and local ties, including recruits from the Indigenous community. He attended Shire meetings, listened to concerns, worked to bridge the deep divides left by decades of corruption. It wasn't easy. Trust, once shattered, was slow to mend. There were setbacks, lingering pockets of resistance, but for the first time in memory, the people of Ironbark felt they had a voice, a stake in their own future. One evening, months later, Ethan stood watching the sunset paint the Outback sky in fiery colors. Hank ambled up beside him. "Council meeting went all right?" Hank asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Mostly. Still arguing about road maintenance, but at least they're not arguing about kickbacks." He looked out at the small town, quiet now under the emerging stars of the Southern Cross. "We did all right, Hank." Hank nodded, pulling his hat lower. "Yeah, Superintendent, we did all right." He paused. "Takes a man willing to be buried, I reckon, to help a place rise up again." Ethan didn't reply, just watched the last light fade, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future settle over Ironbark Shire. The scars remained, but so did the hope. Stronger now, more resilient, rooted in the hard-won truth that even in the harshest landscape, change could take root and blossom. Ethan Rowe's story is a stark reminder that the deepest darkness often precedes the dawn. It's a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the profound power of one individual refusing to succumb to fear and injustice. Ironbark Shire's journey from corruption to accountability shows that even systems seemingly entrenched in rot can be challenged and changed when people find the courage to speak truth to power, to support one another, and to demand better. This fight wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about reclaiming dignity, restoring hope, and rebuilding a community on the foundation of trust. If Ethan's determination and the courage of the Ironbark community resonated with you, please help share this story of survival and transformation. Like this video, subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives, and share it with anyone who needs a reminder that, even after being buried, it's possible to rise again, stronger than before. Thank you for watching.